Okay, I want to give you a little whirlwind tour of the user interface of Blender so you can see the main features we're going to be using and start to understand some of the terminology. Feel free to come back and reference this more than once if you want to, but I want to give you a little mini tutorial on how to watch these tutorials. Sometimes some people think I talk too fast, sometimes people think I talk too slow. The good news is it's a video, so you can change the speed of my talking if you want, speed it up, slow it down. I watch most tutorials at about 1.5 to 2x speed anyway, so something you might want to consider. The other thing to check out is in this lower left-hand corner, I have some little hotkeys that will show you what buttons I'm pressing no matter what program I'm in. So be on the lookout for that. You can always pause and come back in and get a sense of what tools I am using. So this is Blender, and this is what it's going to mostly look up when you come into it. It's going to have a little light, a camera, and probably the default cube, which usually people delete right away. I'm going to do that by pressing the X key and deleting it. But I want to show you some of the main features. On the left side are the tools that in this mode that I'm currently in. In the upper left-hand corner, you can see I am in the object mode, and at the very top, you can see I'm in what's called the layout mode. Layout's what I spend most time in. There is a modeling tab, which is mostly the same. It just doesn't have the timeline. Doesn't bother me that much, so I leave it there. Over on the right-hand side, we see this is this little widget that shows me which way I'm pointed and oriented. Of course, if you remember from my last lecture, that Y negative is forward, so I know that this is forward for any models that I make, this is left and right, and this is up and down. Now you notice as I'm pressing the middle mouse button, I'm looking the camera around. This is the first thing I really want you to experiment with and get used to is navigation. So middle mouse, dragging it around will sort of rotate my camera. Holding shift in middle mouse will pan my camera, so to move it left, right, up, and down. And control in middle mouse will zoom in and out. I can also scroll the mouse wheel up and down to zoom in and out. Sometimes I don't always like this because you can see the mouse wheel has this sort of stuttering versus control and middle tends to be a smoother, more nuanced, refined kind of zoom in and out. So I use it more frequently. You can also click on these little widgets to get what we call orthographic views. You'll notice that the lines all line up. And in fact, this little symbol changes from perspective to orthographic to show me I'm lining straight onto it. This is often helpful in models to line things up precisely. There'll be times I say go into this orthographic front view, and this is what I mean, is to click on that. Other than that, always use these hotkeys, get used to as much as possible. You can drag this around to navigate, but it's a real pain to keep going up there. Because you're working in 3D and you're looking at a 2D screen, you're gonna navigate a lot, so get used to it. Up at the top, there's some settings in terms of our snapping and things like that. We'll be using that later. No need to worry about that yet. And we also have some display options that I'll talk about. But before we can do anything, we need something in the scene, and I already deleted the cube, so let's make a new one. Shift and A is our add hotkey, as you can see, and we're gonna go to mesh, and we're gonna go to cube. And that adds our cube back, yay! So we have a couple modes here. This one is called X-ray, means it kind of goes into a ghosty mode, often really helpful for modeling. Let's turn that back off. And then I have a couple different display options. I have wireframe, I have this solid one, I have this one which involves like material shading, which we'll talk about in a second, and this one which is a preview of whatever our render is gonna look like. We spend most of the time in the second bubble, so if I say change your viewport mode, you can change it there. Each of these have little carrots that give you additional information and more settings. So I can turn things on and off, and this is kind of where we're gonna be doing it. We're gonna get into this a little bit. Don't worry too much about this right now, but this is all these little options are here. If you press N on your keyboard, you'll also see you have this little menu. This is sometimes called the N menu because you hit N to turn it on and off. And it has little tabs with all sorts of stuff in it, including a bunch of plugins I have. You won't have most of these, but that's okay. A lot of these are plugins that I have turned on. The most important one for you to know about today is item, because here is where we can see changes to location X, Y, and Z, as well as rotation X, Y, and Z, and scale X, Y, and Z, and as well as keeping us up to date with our dimensions. At any time, I can hover over these and press backspace to reset all of these. Another note for those of you looking at these hotkeys down there, you'll notice that as I'm pressing stuff, I hit Alt. Now, maybe you're working on a Mac computer and you say, Andrew, I don't have an Alt key on my computer and my control is Command. When you're working in Blender on Apple, it's exactly the same hotkeys. The only difference is instead of Alt, you press Opt. OPT. That is literally the only difference. Don't use command in place of control. Use control because Mac command sometimes, Blender uses lots of hotkeys. So Blender is just assuming you're using the control key. So if I say control and you're on a Mac, use control. If I say alt, I'll try to remember to say alt opt most of the time. But if I say alt, just hit option on a Mac. It's the exact same thing. That's the only difference. Other than that, the hotkeys for both programs are identical. So, but as I take this, I can also move stuff around. So I have a move tool here, and you see as I move it, it's going to update information about its position, all relative to the origin space. Remember, I said 0, 0, 0. We also have our rotate tools, our scale tool, and this little dude here, which kind of is supposed to give us all of them at once. I don't really use it that much, but it's handy. Now, as I mentioned, this program is very hotkey driven, meaning most of the time, I'm going to press buttons to do things. And the buttons for all of these tools that I'm going to use a lot are G for grab, R for rotate, and S for scale. Now you notice it does these all at once. I can actually combine keys together. So if I hit GX, I will only move it on the X. If I hit RY, it'll only rotate around the Y. If I hit SZ, it's only going to scale on this. And I can even do the opposite of that. So if I hit G Shift Z, then it's going to move everything but on the G. And if I right click, it'll always undo that function. Play around with it a little bit. Again, feel free as I'm going to pause the video and try it out yourself. It kind of can get complicated, but like I said, it's one thing at a time. The more you use it, the more you'll get used to it. The other thing I can do, so if I say I want to rotate this 45 degrees along the y-axis, is I can say Y, I can say R, Y, 45. And it's going to do exactly that. This is really, really weird at first, and you're going to be like, why would I ever do that? Why would I just press the buttons or punch it in here and use these rotate tools? You're going to do it a lot because you're going to find it's really, really fast when you get used to it. Another thing that you can do that I use a lot is if I hit G and then I press the middle mouse button and I kind of drag the middle mouse button, you can see I've got this little dotted white line that will correspond with different axes. So I can hit G and then sort of move it up in this line, and now it stays constrained to that line. I can do the same thing with rotate, like pick an axis to rotate along, scale, and then just pick an axis, and that just saves me a little bit of button pressing. It's pretty nice. So this cube, you can see, is over here in scene collection, including my camera and my light. Whatever I select gets highlighted, both places. This is the outliner. It's sort of like the folder structure for our program. And down here is the properties pane, which involves all these little white ones are properties for the whole scene. The other more colorful ones are properties for the object itself, like properties of this object you can see transform is repeated back here. As well as other stuff like down here. This is this little guy, it's called material. So right now my cube doesn't have any color. And if I switch over to this third viewport shading, I see it's white because it doesn't, it's just default. If I click new, it's going to create a new material and I can give it a color. I can also mess with properties like, is it metal, or how shiny is it, by making it rough or smooth. So lots of different options in terms of how to display it. Let's also talk a little bit though about modeling it. Right now, I'm just manipulating it as a whole object. All of these things are objects. To be able to actually change the shape of this thing, I need to go into what's called edit mode, which you can see edit mode now activates the individual vertices down here, those points in space. I'll be talking a little bit more of those with modeling. I'm just giving you a tour right now, so you don't need to worry about that much. Like I said, pause it, play with it. There's no wrong answers today. I'm just trying to show you how the buttons work, basically. But this lets me select or shift select things, and I can use those same G, R, and S, or the same move, scale, and rotate tools to do the exact same things. And this is how I would change the shape of something. I have a lot of things I can do, and most of the time I leave my little tool here on maybe like tweak, so I can grab and I can move something, maybe manipulate the shape a little bit. Let's say I want a more complicated shape than this. Well, I'm gonna need more geometry. So I have these 8 points right now, and sure, I can move those around, but if I wanna do more, I need more points. So Control R is my cut tool right here. You could find a lot of these tools are over on the side too, like the loop cut, knife, bevel, and extrude, but I really recommend getting used to the hotkeys. Blender is designed to be used with hotkeys, so you'll get used to them pretty quickly in this class. You can find them over here though if you're just starting out. So you can see I now have more points, that means I have more to move around with. Another very commonly used feature is what's called the extrude. So I select all these and I now have a face, and if I hit E, it's going to extrude out a whole shape. Now right now I'm in this mode, vertex selection, so I'm selecting little points. If I press 2 on my keyboard, I select the little edges. And if I press 3 on the keyboard, I select the whole faces. So I can select all the faces and hit I for inset, and then E for extrude. So I can create some really crazy shapes here. We're going to get all of these tools in this semester. I just want to show you this is where we edit and change the points. Pressing tab again then brings me back out to object mode. It's always important to know which one I'm in right now. Tab, you're going to use a lot. This is the way Blender works, is I'm in object mode or I'm in edit mode. Let's take a quick look at some of these other panels, and then I want to jump over, wrap up and jump over into Substance Painter really quick. So I got other tabs, like I mentioned, there's modeling. There's also sculpting, which is where all of our sculpting tools and brushes are. This, unlike modeling, works almost more like painting or working with clay. So if I hit G to create the grab brush here, it works more like grabbing groups of these verts together. And I hit F to make my brush bigger. I can sort of mold and shape it around. This is really great for organic shapes, like if I'm sculpting characters or plants or things or rocks even. As opposed to working with the sort of point-by-point modeling you see here, which is closer to what you get from a CAD program. I also have UV editing. So UVs are how we actually, if I hit A to select everything, this is its UV space. So just like a cardboard box, to print it needs to be flattened. In order to paint textures on it, I need to be able to flatten all the faces here. Let's do that really quick. I'm just going to hit U for unwrap. And I'm going to do what's called a Smart UV project. Now, there's a lot of stuff to projection. I'm going to set my margin to 0.01. Again, all stuff we're going to talk about. Just wanted to say, try it, do it, and you're going to see what it does is assigns each of these faces to its own space without any of them overlapping. Meaning, I could take it to Photoshop or something like that, and I can actually paint what would go on this surface, adding letters, numbers, details, a little angry face on something. That's kind of the thing I would do in texture paint down here, where if I wanted to, I could add a new texture. So let's do new base color, say okay, fills it with a color, and then I can actually paint on it. And if we open that base color here, you can see it's exactly what I'm doing, is I'm painting on the surface. But I'm going to show you, this is how you do it in here. I'm going to show you why Substance Painter is way better than this though. We also have the shading tab, which we can see that's the exact same image going into base color. That's the same settings that I have in my materials tab over here. And what's cool about this is there's a bunch of stuff we can plug in. We're going to really get into this. There's really cool stuff we can do in here, but essentially this is where we control this. We also have animation, rendering. We're going to get a little compositing. We don't touch into many of these very much, mostly these front ones. But let's go ahead, take this guy, and we're going to bring it out, and it's not going to bring any of the materials, any of the colors, any of that stuff we've done with it already, but it will just have the model. So I'm going to take this object as it is. I'm going to go to File, Export. Actually, before I do this, saving. That's important. Let's learn how to save something. Go to File and Save, and I'm going to just call this, let's save it on my desktop. I'm going to call this Day 1 Demo. Again, no wrong answers here. I'm not trying to get you to make anything. We're just playing with stuff. So now that we have the Blender file, it's saved itself, let's export this because the Blender file will be a .blend. Just like a Photoshop file, it only gets opened in the program. So .blend only gets opened in Blender. I want to save it as something called an OBJ or even an FBX, but I'll choose OBJ. They're nice and simple. And that's like taking your Photoshop file and saving it as a PNG or a JPEG, something that can be read by anything. So this right here, the OBJ is a standard format that we can export it as. And we're going to make sure we say selection only. So we only bring in the model, which we currently have selected, thanks to the outline. My outline is green. Yours is probably orange. I just changed up my UI just a little bit to make it easier for you to see the differences, because depending on your monitor, it might not be as easy to see. I'm going to save this, Day 1 Demo, OBJ. Let's export it. Let's leave everything else the same, though. And then let's open up Substance Painter. Substance Painter does just painting, whereas Blender does everything. Substance Painter does one thing, and it does it super well. We're almost done with this little demo today. So we're going to go up to New in Substance Painter. And I'm going to leave all these settings exactly the same. Don't play with them at all. And let's add that day one demo file right here. So we want to make sure all the file types we can get. This little guy, I believe, let me make sure because it's want to be on details because I know the, I made sample both those. So, Blender demo is a different thing. This little 3D object is what I want. So let's open it up. I'm going to leave all these settings the same, not include anything else. Don't even worry about this resolution. But as soon as I click that, it's going to bring in my model. Hey, look, there it is. And similar to what we have before, we have our models. Now, here's going to be the tough part. All that navigation I just told you about Blender is different here. So instead, it's all about the Alt or Option key. Alt left pans or sort of rotates the camera. Alt middle pans. And Alt right zooms in and out. If you've used Unity before, this is exactly the same. Blender's a little different. There is a way in Blender to actually get it to have what they call industry standard hotkeys. Don't use it. Trust me, just get used to the Blender's weird way of doing it. It's got so much invested in its own unique workflow that it's best to just learn it. That's what I think. That's what all the pros you're going to find online are going to say too. But if you hold down Alt or Option, you're going to see all little things we can do: rotate, translate, and zoom. But we're not going to worry too much about that right now. We have over here a layer, and we've got all these cool materials. And what's neat about Painter is it comes with this whole host of really, really cool looking materials that I can just grab and drag onto my model, and it will update. And this wouldn't work if I hadn't done that UVing step. So if you skipped the step where I unwrapped everything and it doesn't do it, that's exactly why. So let's take, we can look at all sorts of different materials. As I drag them on, you can see it's adding more on top of them. And I can turn it on and off just like in Photoshop, different layers. And I can also add a new layer, a little paint layer here. And in my paint layer, I can do all sorts of cool stuff. So right now I'm just painting this material, which is pretty cool. But I can also clear that out and choose just like a color. Let's rotate around. Maybe I'll just give him a little smile and a little face. There's lots of stuff we could do here. I'm going to dive deeper into what you can do with all of this. I just wanted to get you to the point where you can kind of play around with it and make some stuff in here. Because this is where, like I said, where we're going to be playing with it. If you do have your tablet up, this is a great time to use it because we can actually use things like pressure sensitivity and drawing right on the screen to create our little guy. I kind of like him. Boxio is what I'm going to call him. Saving of this is same in any other program, just save as. And Boxio, that's his name. And it's going to save it as a special file format. We're not going to worry about getting all this stuff out. I'm going to show you more of the workflow, but this is about as much time as I want to show you in just one day. I just want you to get used to the user interface of both of these programs. Play around with it a little bit for the first day. Make something horrendous. Post your results on the Discord. Have a laugh about it. We're not being too serious. We're just getting familiar with where things are. Tomorrow, we're going to dive deeper into how to actually use these tools to do some box modeling, to start creating intentional shapes to make the treasure chest, which will be the basis of our first assignment. Can't wait to see what you come up with. Bye, everybody.